Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ, King of endless glory. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ, King of endless glory. I give you a new commandment, says the Lord. Love one another as I have loved you. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ, King of endless glory.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from this world to the Father. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, to hand him over. So, during supper, fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God, he rose from supper and took off his outer garments. He took a towel and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus said to him, "Whoever has bathed has no need except to have his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." For he knew who would betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Pues muy buenas tardes a todos. Very happy Holy Thursday evening to everyone. As you can tell, we're seeing every aspect of our parish this evening. One of the beautiful things about having these high holy feast days is we get to have not only our regular, English community, but also we have our Hispanic community, and even our Wabash students are participating in the Triduum with us. We now have 3 different choirs in our parish. We have our English choir, we have our Spanish choir, and this semester a Schola choir started at Wabash College. So we have all of them here with us this evening. The Mass will be bilingual, so if you want to follow along for the parts in Spanish, you might consider getting one of the missalettes in the back. Buenas tardes a todos. Uno de los gustos de tener las fiestas solemnes aquí es que podemos celebrar con toda la comunidad, no solo los hispanos y los gringos, pero también los estudiantes de Wabash. Entonces, si quieres seguir en esos misales ahí en el vestíbulo, puedes seguir con nosotros. Holy Thursday. Holy Thursday is the night where we remember Christ's Passover. And also not just Christ's Passover, but the first Passover. From our first reading, we heard from the book of Exodus. We heard about the taking of the lamb, the slaughtering of the lamb and wiping the blood on the doorpost, and the meal consisting of the lamb. This Passover is celebrated every single year by the Jews. Every single year they would gather for this meal, and they would look upon the lamb who had been slain so that they might live. Anyone living in Egypt in that first Passover had a choice. You either kill the lamb or you lose your firstborn son. The reason you have life is because the lamb has received death. And every single year, the Jews would celebrate this feast, giving thanks to God for life in exchange for the death of the lamb. On this final Passover, Christ took the chalice and he said, "This is my blood." Not the blood of lambs, but my own blood. The blood of the new covenant. Surely you can understand how the disciples would have felt. His blood must be shed so that they might live. What exactly was Jesus doing at the Last Supper besides instituting the Eucharist? He gave them his body and his blood. But not only did he give them his body and his blood, he also gave them his own task. This is one of the great mysteries of Christianity. That Christ is not still with us in the way he was with his disciples 2,000 years ago. Jesus chose to assume a finite human nature to himself. A finite human nature which would not endure forever. What would happen with Christ's followers and his disciples when Christ had to move on to return to his Father? Christ took his own blood, his own offering, his own task of salvation, of redeeming the world, and he passed it on to his successors. We know that after Jesus rose from the dead, one of the things he told his disciples was that they now had the power to forgive sins. But only God can forgive sins. Christ gave his own authority to forgive sins to his apostles. Christ at the Last Supper took the bread and the wine and he changed it into his own body and blood. And he told them, "Do this in memory of me." That didn't just mean like a happy remembering of the occasion. He meant, do this as the ritual sacrifice in my place. From now on, you will be making the Eucharist. Christ washed the disciples' feet. Why did he wash the disciples' feet? Of course, it was to give them an example of humility. Washing feet was like a slave's job. Christ was humbling himself, just as later on, 2 days later, he would humble himself by having his garments stripped, just as he stripped himself of his priestly garments in order to descend and wash their feet. But Christ was not just giving them an example. He was ordaining them. In the Old Testament, when a man was made a priest, on the way to the altar, he first had to stop, and he had to be washed in the pool of water at the entrance to the sanctuary. In order to receive the office of the priesthood, you first had to wash. This is why Christ was washing the disciples' feet. He was giving them his own priestly authority. And in order to prepare them for the ordination, they had to be washed. They didn't get it at first. St. Peter said, "Lord, you will never wash my feet." And notice what Jesus said. He said, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." That might not make a lot of sense to us modern hearers, but it made absolute sense to Peter and the other apostles. You see, in the Old Testament, the priestly tribe of the Levites, they were the only tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel who did not inherit any land as a member of Israel. The Levites, the priestly tribe, their own inheritance was the Lord, not a piece of land. Christ was telling Peter in a very Jewish way, "Unless I wash you, you have no inheritance with me. You cannot be ordained." And that's when Peter started to get it. He said, "Not only my feet, but my hands and my head as well," because in the Old Testament, when you were ordained, you had to have your whole body submersed in the waters of ordination. At this Last Supper, the disciples, used to seeing the slain lamb in exchange for those salvation, not only hear the words of Christ putting himself in the place of that lamb, but recognizing that the priestly sacrifice that he is about to endure, he is also handing on to his disciples. They would be the first priests. And not only would they be priests, but they would be martyrs. Every single one of the disciples was slain for the faith. Every single one of them had their blood shed to participate in the salvation and redemption of the world. All priests, even today in the church, are called to die. There are priests in the world, many priests, who literally shed their blood for the faith. Others who die a spiritual death. One of the reasons why priests wear black is to represent the fact that we have died to ourselves, so that we might serve the Lord. Foregoing families, spouses, a normal existence, the salvation of the world. On this Feast of Holy Thursday, we give thanks to God for the holy priesthood. We give thanks to God that he has not simply left us abandoned as orphans when he returned to heaven, but gave us his church, most tangibly represented in the sacraments which are given to us by the priests. And we also recognize on this Holy Thursday that not only do we have the sacramental priesthood, but we also have the universal priesthood of all believers, that all of us, through the sacrament of baptism as well, have a sort of ordination in an unofficial capacity, that we are all called to die so that we might serve the Lord. On this Feast of Holy Thursday, as each of us come forward for communion, let us be mindful. It is because of the blood of Christ that we are able to live. And shame on us if we are not willing to return everything back to him in return.